Hello everyone and welcome to video 1 in chapter 2.3 competitive market equilibrium. So this is the third chapter in unit 2 microeconomics. We finished demand, we finished supply, and in 2.3 equilibrium we're going to put these two together to create equilibrium. These are our learning objectives. There's quite a few there, so I've broken this down into 3 videos. The first video is going to take us up to rationing. The second video will do consumer producer surplus, and the third video will be an HL only. This video is likely to be a bit longer because I'm trying to put more into this video. So first off, we're just going to quickly define market equilibrium. So market equilibrium can be defined as when quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. We're going to define it a bit more academically in a bit. But basically in 2.1 we did demand, so we got the downward sloping demand curve. In 2.2 we got the upward sloping supply curve, and we derived these from the table of data that we had. We can now put these together. So we got the price, we've got quantity demanded at each price and quantity supplied at each price. And if we put all that together and graph it, then we get a diagram that looks like this, and almost all supply and demand diagrams will have this shape where you've got upward sloping supply and downward sloping demand. There are some exceptions which we'll study later in the course. So basically equilibrium is when quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. It's the intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve. So we look here, we've got the equilibrium price of $40, which is where this intersection occurs. And then if we come down to the x-axis, this is going to give us a quantity of 25 million. We can also look at the table as well. So the price of $40, we can see that quantity demand is 25 million and quantity supplied is also 25 million. So we have equilibrium, everything's in balance, everything is good. However, for the rest of the chapter, we're going to look at when this doesn't happen and then how do we get back to equilibrium. So in this situation, we're going to have a surplus. So in the diagram, we're going to say that the price is $60. So therefore, the price is above the equilibrium of $40. At a price of $60, we have a surplus, which we can also call excess supply. The word excess means too much of something. So we effectively have too much supply. So if we go to the diagram at a price of 60, to get quantity supplied, we go horizontally across from 60 until we hit the supply curve. And then we go down here. So quantity supplied is going to be 35 million. Quantity demanded, we would do the same thing. We go across from $60, but this time until we hit the demand curve. And then quantity demanded will be 15 million. So you can see at the higher price, quantity supplied is bigger than quantity demanded. So therefore, we have a surplus of 20 million shoes in the market. And again, we can see that over here at a price of 60, QS, quantity supplied is 35 million. Quantity demanded is 15 million. And if you think about this, this makes sense. If the price is too high, then people are not going to want to buy it, but companies will want to sell it because they can make a lot of profit. So therefore, there'll be too many of the good or service in the market, and we'll have this surplus. So therefore, yeah, businesses will need to reduce the price. We'll get onto that in a minute. So the opposite is also true. The shortage is when the price is below the equilibrium. So in this situation, we got the price below the equilibrium, assuming a price of $20. To get quantity demanded, we go across to the demand curve, giving us 35 million. Quantity supplied, we go across to the supply curve, giving us 15 million. So we have quantity demanded is bigger than quantity supplied. So we have a shortage. This is when we don't have enough of something. And the other way we can say that is excess demand, where the word excess means we've got too much demand. And if you think about this, this is a market where the price is really, really, really low. So lots of people are going to want to buy it. Companies won't be motivated to sell it because there's not much profit. So there's therefore not going to be enough in the market. And we can see those numbers in the table as well. So this brings us on to market disequilibrium. So market disequilibrium is the opposite of market equilibrium. So disequilibrium is when QD, quantity demanded, does not equal quantity supplied. And we just saw 2 examples. So in general, when there's a shortage is when the price is below equilibrium down here. The price is going to rise up to until we get to equilibrium. And when there's a surplus, prices will decrease until we get back to equilibrium. In the last slide in the video, we're going to go through that in a bit more detail. And in general, markets will move towards equilibrium. So we've got a price here. In general, prices will go up or prices will go down until we get back to equilibrium. So just to summarize, shortage, prices will increase, surplus, prices will decrease. So just before I move on to show how we get a change in equilibrium, just to put that into a bit more of a real life example. So imagine you've got a shop and you're selling this product here, and at the end of every day you see that all of the products are sold. There are people coming into the shop who want to buy the product, but there's none left because everyone's bought it. So you'd say that there's a shortage here because people want to buy the product, but you've already sold out. So in this situation, as a business owner, what you're likely to do is think, well, if we've got a shortage and lots of people want to buy this product, let's just push the price up. Similarly, if you've got a supermarket and at the end of every day you see this, where you've got all of these products that people are not wanting to buy, then you're going to see that you've got a surplus, and at some point you're probably going to have to reduce the price in order to sell those products. So this is kind of like a common sense example showing what's on this slide. In general, prices will move towards equilibrium so that we get a balance between supply and demand. So let's move on to changes in equilibrium. So we've looked at a situation where we've got equilibrium price and quantity, where maybe we've got a price that's too high or too low. What about when we get a shift in supply and demand? So in this situation, we're going to get a change in equilibrium. So a shift or a change in supply or demand will lead to new equilibrium price and quantity. And you can see that on the diagram. So the initial equilibrium is the black dot, which is the intersection of the supply curve and D1, which is the first or initial demand curve. Then what's going to happen is, just assuming here, we're going to get an increase in income in the market for apples. So the demand curve is going to shift outwards from D1 to D2, and we're going to move from the black equilibrium to the orange equilibrium. So we're just going to go through in a bit more detail why we get that movement from one equilibrium to another one. So the process. So we can see that the market starts at equilibrium price of $40 and equilibrium quantity of 25 million. So you can see here at this first equilibrium, the price is $40 over here, and the equilibrium quantity is 25 million. So this is where we start. Then, as we can see, we're going to get this increase in income. So the increase in income increases demand because it's one of those non-price determinants of demand. And the demand curve is going to shift outwards from D1 to D2. So we're going to get this total shift in the curve from D1 to D2. So this is what we spent a lot of time on in 2.1 when we went through demand. Now, this is the key thing. So at the original price, the price hasn't changed yet. All that's happened is that the demand curve has shifted outwards, and at all prices, people want to buy more. At this original price, we're now going to see that quantity demanded is not equal to quantity supplied. The quantity supplied is still at 25 million, but now to get quantity demanded, we need to go across to the new demand curve. So the quantity demanded is now going to be 35 million. So we can say at the original price, $40, there's now a shortage because in this situation, yes, the quantity demanded is bigger than the quantity supplied. Quantity demanded is 35 million and quantity supplied is 25 million. So therefore, we got the shortage equals to 10 million. Now, what we saw earlier on, in order to eliminate this shortage, the price will rise until it reaches this new price of the intersection between D2 and the supply curve. So we're going to get this new equilibrium price of $50 and the new equilibrium quantity in the market of 30 million. So the way we get from the first equilibrium to the second equilibrium is that the price rises to eliminate this shortage. We can also do the same for an increase in supply. So again, a change in supply or demand will lead to a new equilibrium price or quantity. In this situation, let's assume we've got a decrease in input costs in the market for Apple. So the process is when we go through the same logic, we start at $40 and an equilibrium quantity of $25 million. So we're starting at this initial black dot equilibrium. So in this situation, the decrease in input costs this time will lead to a change in supply, specifically an increase in supply. So if you remember that the input cost was one of the non-price determinants of supply, so the increase in supply and the supply curve is going to shift rightwards from S1 to S2. So the initial supply curve is the blue one. The new supply curve is the yellow one, I think that's yellow, which is labeled S2. So we're going to get the same situation at the initial price, because price doesn't change initially, it has to change for some reason. At this initial price of $40, we're going to see that quantity demanded is no longer the same as quantity supplied. The quantity demanded is still on the initial D1 curve, the initial demand curve. So the quantity demanded is going to be 25 million, but the new quantity supplied will be on the new supply curve, which will be at 35 million. So therefore, we're going to get a surplus equal to that 10 million, which is the 35 million minus the 25 million. So we've got this surplus, we've got this excess supply, which is caused by the increase in supply. This makes sense. We've got more supply, an increase in supply. So therefore, that's going to lead to excess supply. Now, as we saw earlier on, in order to eliminate the surplus, the price will fall until it reaches $30. So the price is going to come from $40 down to $30 because that's where we've got the intersection of the new supply curve and the demand curve, which will give us an equilibrium quantity of 30 million. There's a typo though, that's not surplus, that should be surplus. So what we can do now is we can actually look at all of the permutations. So earlier we saw we've got an increase in demand. If we've got an increase in demand, we move from the blue equilibrium to the purple equilibrium, which leads to an increase in price and an increase in quantity. Similarly, if we get a decrease in demand, then we'll move from this blue equilibrium to this purple equilibrium, which will mean that the price and quantity will both go down. Looking at supply, we can now do the same with supply. We did an increase in supply, so we moved from the green supply to the new purple supply curve. So you can see that the price goes down from P1 to P2, equilibrium quantity goes up from Q1 to Q2. So the price goes down, quantity goes up. So you can see with the supply curve, the price and quantity move in different directions. With a decrease in supply, it's the opposite situation. We move from the blue equilibrium to the purple equilibrium. So the equilibrium price goes up and the equilibrium quantity goes down. And we can then summarize this in a table. So there's four possibilities. Demand can increase or decrease. Supply can increase or decrease. So if demand increases and supply stays the same, then the equilibrium price will go up and the equilibrium quantity will go up. And then you can work through all those permutations. If you're in a situation and you're not sure what happens to price and quantity, I normally just draw a diagram, or I kind of move my hands like that, if that makes sense. But that can be a nice way of remembering it. It gets a bit more complicated when we get a shift in demand and supply at the same time, but we'll cover that later. All right, we've got one more learning objective to do, which is functions of the price mechanism. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the demand example we did first, where we've got an increase in demand from D1 to D2. It doesn't matter the reason. I think when we did it earlier, it was an increase in income. And we move from this equilibrium up to the orange equilibrium. So the price mechanism is defined as how the forces of supply and demand move a market back to equilibrium. So we saw earlier that if we have an increase in demand, then we're going to have a shortage at the initial price of 40, where quantity demanded is bigger than quantity supplied, and the price will rise up to $50. So we covered that on an earlier slide. So the price mechanism is why that happens. Why does the price rise? In order to eliminate the shortage. And there are three parts of the price mechanism. The first part is the signaling effect. So what's going to happen is that the price is going to go up, and this increase in price is going to be a sign. Sign is derived from the word signal. So this sign, this tells consumers and producers that something is changing in the market. If there's no change in supply or demand, then there'll be no change in price and there'll be no signaling effect, and everything stays the same. So again, the signaling effect, the price goes up, and therefore consumers and producers know that something is happening, something is changing in the market. The rationing effect is going to affect the quantity demanded. So as the price goes up, as there's an increase in price, this will cause the quantity demanded to decrease. So in this situation, at the initial price of $40, you can see that the quantity demanded is 35 million. As the price goes up to 50 million, we're going to move along this new demand curve moving from 35 million up to 30 million. So this just follows the law of demand. As the price goes up because of the price mechanism, then less people are going to want to buy the product, which is going to help reduce this shortage. Then the final effect is on the supply side, which is the incentive effect. So as the price goes up, the quantity supplied, the QS, is going to increase as businesses know they can make more profit in this market. So the original price of $40, you can see with this equilibrium, and the quantity supplied is 25 million. As the price goes up, companies are going to produce more, or the higher price is going to attract other companies to enter the market. And therefore, we're going to get an increase in quantity supplied and move along the supply curve like this. So the rationing and incentive effect reduce the shortage. The rationing effect reduces the quantity demand, and the incentive effect increases the quantity supplied until we get back to 50, where the market is in equilibrium. Okay, that's finished, but one final thing to think about is if we go back to 1.1 when we talked about the basic economic problem, how we allocate scarce resources. This diagram now shows us how the free market allocates resources. So you can see in the diagram at the initial equilibrium, there were 25 million products traded in this market. It doesn't matter what the good or service is. And then what happens is demand goes up, and we went to a new equilibrium with 30 million. And what we've got here is we've got a reallocation of resources. In the new equilibrium, there are 30 million traded in the market, which is bigger than the initial equilibrium of 25 million. And that means that now there are more resources allocated to this industry, because obviously we need more resources to produce 30 million than 35 million. And so you can see that the increase in price has resulted in more resources being allocated to this market. And this is therefore how a free market allocates resources. When there's a change in supply or demand, then more or less resources are going to be allocated to this market. And so this is how the free market allocates resources. No one's actually allocating resources, but it's more that the price moves to actually change how many resources are allocated to it. And this is, if you've heard of the term Adam Smith's invisible hand, this is how Adam Smith described it. All right, that's a very long video. In the next video, we'll cover the rest of these. I'll see you then.